Is the hero shooter genre due for a major change in the hierarchy of power? Hero shooters are not a new thing. Team Fortress and Battlefield 1942 both had elements where you'd get unique abilities based on the characters that you played with. A little more recently, we've gotten games like Overwatch and Apex Legends, which take those mechanics to a whole new level with a wide variety of kits and lore behind each character. Add on that these are incredibly popular games with hundreds of thousands of monthly players, and it's easy to see why more and more of these games keep popping up. But super recently, and I mean in the last few months, we've seen the meteoric rise of a new kind of hero shooter. The franchise-based kind. Marvel Rivals is a new kid on the block, and man is it popular. In just the last 30 days, over 1.2 million people have played the game. I don't think I need to tell you that that's a really large number. So what does this mean for hero shooters, a really popular genre casually and competitively? To understand why Rivals came in so hot and why Star Wars has their own hero shooter coming to PC soon, you have to understand where the genre has been and where it's at currently. And a little disclaimer, I'm going to be moving pretty quickly, so sorry about that. I think. Way back before we had hero shooters, we had tactical shooters. Games like Rainbow Six and Counter-Strike were designed around realism, giving players many tools they can use to keep themselves from dying or to complete the objective quickly. This was obviously very popular and introduced a lot of titles that played a big role in defining the genre and gameplay style. One of these titles was Brothers in Arms Road to Hill 30, a game that released in 2005 and often held as one of the most engaging tac shooters of the time, especially in the saturated World War II genre. Now that game is important for context for that reason, but also because its developer was Gearbox Software. See, 9 years after Brothers in Arms released, Gearbox announced another game, Battleborn. As far as I can tell, Gearbox were the ones that coined the term hero shooter to promote Battleborn. Unlucky for them though, Blizzard Entertainment had something cooking that kind of blew them out of the water. Overwatch was announced a few months after Battleborn and took on the descriptor of hero shooter really quickly. Leading up to the releases, there was discourse around the price points of both the games as well as the reputations of the developers, with Blizzard being a heavier hitter. Once both games released, it took a little bit of time, but Overwatch ended up winning in public opinion and Battleborn servers were shut down in early 2021. Okay, great. Overwatch was super popular. The competitive scene developed into a huge arena for skilled gamers, viewers, and casuals loved it. It's only up from here, right? Not quite, but before I talk about the perceived downfall of Overwatch, you have to understand a different shift that happened in multiplayer games starting in 2017. Battle Royale games were entering a golden era. One of the games leading this charge was PUBG, a tactical shooter meets open world free-for-all, giving players realistic gameplay in a huge setting. And then you had Fortnite, a game that's just about the opposite. Fortnite had an approachability that not many games can have given the actual gameplay, and it led to very widespread, very mainstream popularity. Put it simply, Fortnite was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, Ninja streamed with Drake, Travis Scott, and Juju Smith-Schuster, bringing all kinds of eyes to the title and breaking all kinds of records on Twitch. The esports scene exploded, and it's a game I consider to be a career maker for creators across the internet. My favorite of these Fortnite creators is probably Grant. Love watching his content. Anyway, this popularity led to a pretty interesting decision on Epic Games' part. The Battle Royale started integrating incredibly popular IP into the game through the map, weapons, cosmetics, and abilities. Everything from Marvel to DC, Atlas to Dragon Ball, and even pop culture icons like Ariana Grande and world-class athletes like LeBron James were weaved into the game. According to this Reddit post, there were a total of 414 collaboration skins in the game as of a year ago. That's an insane amount of culture crossover, and with the Unreal Engine and a near unlimited amount of maps and games for you to dive into, Fortnite is so much more than a simple game, it's its own platform. Fortnite's success showed developers and publishers, for better or worse, that free-to-play, franchise-driven content could succeed. They just needed a little bit of help. Companies saw gold mining combining very recognizable and loved IP with genres where microtransactions made the most sense. Right now, it seems like that genre is hero shooters. But why? Why hero shooters, and why franchises like Marvel and Star Wars? First of all, these franchises have a large amount of scalable or adaptable content that makes hero shooters the perfect place to show off the individuality of all of their characters without relying solely on cosmetics. For example, I think it's a much more enticing concept to actually wield Mjolnir in battle rather than simply hold it. This is something that Fortnite actually started to integrate as well in later seasons with their collab crossovers, and I think that's what led to much more success down the line. Then, of course, you have to understand the new publishing meta of these games being free to play. This might make some devs scratch heads on how to convince players to buy cosmetics consistently, but Fortnite proved that IP-based content is a moneymaker that helps the game make billions of dollars. And for a free-to-play game like this to thrive on one-time purchases, you need a lot of players. If there's one thing that franchises like Marvel and Star Wars have, it's a lot of fans. But converting a fan who may have never played a video game before, let alone a shooter, is not going to be easy. But what's the solution? Simple. You promise them an experience that they can't get anywhere else. You let them play as their favorite heroes from those IPs with unique takes on their iconic powers. On top of this genre being primed for these sorts of entries, the current defining game of the style, Overwatch 2, was met with a wave of negativity upon launch. In less than 48 hours of the game's release, the game was review bombed, leading to the very dreaded, overwhelmingly negative tag on the Steam store page. And it became the worst rated game on the site, and no one missed a chance to report that, so yeah, it wasn't looking good. About 2/3 of those reviews were left in simplified Chinese, which some people said was due to Blizzard dissolving a deal with NetEase, making it to where Chinese players couldn't play Overwatch overseas. Now, if NetEase sounds familiar, they should. They're collectively the minds behind Marvel Rivals. Take that as you will, but I think they got their lick back in a big way. Now, the timeline of all that stuff is really weird, so it's very possible that Blizzard saw they were developing Marvel Rivals and was like, no, you don't get to make a highly competitive game in this space and expect us to just keep supporting players over there, whatever, I don't know, but still.
Hey, it's the ajoll that edits these videos. I just wanted to make a quick note on this entire point that Blizzard and NetEase weren't really getting along anyway, and that this wasn't exactly a case of like Blizzard being a big bad guy and being like xenophobic towards Chinese people. It just, they weren't getting along. There was like reported, feelings of bad faith arguments on both sides, or bad faith like agreements on both sides. So I just wanted to be clear that this isn't like a case of Blizzard being really awful to NetEase and Chinese people. It's just the two companies not agreeing. Just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, back to the video.
So the stage is set. The reigning champs are falling from grace. The new kid on the block with the proverbial chip on his shoulder is getting a lot of attention, and another title, Star Wars Hunters, has announced its arrival to PC. I think the next step is seeing if the new games are any good. Rivals, by all accounts, has definitely succeeded. When the game dropped in December of 2024, Overwatch 2 saw a 40% drop in concurrent players, according to Steam. With millions of monthly players and a roadmap showing off a bunch of characters that are going to be added, it's only a matter of time before the game cements itself in the genre. The competitive scene is getting started, and players around the world are creating content that's quickly becoming a force on platforms like Twitch, TikTok, and YouTube. Rivals is 6v6, something that actually ends up being a pretty balanced selling point compared to OW2, which dipped down to 5v5 play, much to players' dismay. I've played a lot of Marvel Rivals, and I think the game is pretty well balanced, and they keep buffing or nerfing characters as the meta evolves with every new character addition. It's not perfect, but it's enjoyably playable. You cannot deny that it feels a lot like Overwatch. With all the content it can pull from Marvel, it definitely has its own charm, and its success might just pave the way for another big IP-based hero shooter to grow in popularity.
Hey, it's Editing ajoll again. This is the part of the video where I was going to talk about Star Wars Hunters. Unfortunately, as of like March 17th, which is like a day before I'm recording and finishing editing this video, they canceled the game. They're not bringing it to PC, and they're stopping support on Switch and mobile in like October 1st, I think. So everything I'm going to say is kind of irrelevant, but I think the points maybe still could make sense or matter as if the game was still happening. If you don't care about that, you can skip to the time that's been on the screen to go to the next part. I'm going to talk about a huge franchise that I think could make a good jump into hero shooters. You might have a great guess as to who that would be, but yeah, it's just an unfortunate thing. I was already in the middle of the editing when I saw the article, so yeah, I don't really know what to say other than that sucks. But if you want to hear what I was going to say about it, it's still going to be, it's right here, it's right here, listen.
It was originally going to launch on mobile and Nintendo Switch only, which are distinct audiences from PC, Xbox, and PlayStation gamers. I'm wondering if the goal was to find a middle ground between Galaxy of Heroes and Battlefront, where there is strategy and there is the tactical shooter flavor, but it's a little more approachable and laid back. It's already out on both of those platforms, and I've given both a try, and I have to say, I kind of see the vision. It definitely has some room to grow, and I would say it has a distinct like mobile feel. The gameplay feels a little basic, and visually it falls really flat. Two things that I think would be answered easily with the PC version of the game. The gameplay will get better because the players will be better, and that'll create a greater challenge for everyone. And visually, it seems like the whole reason it's coming to PC is so that it can get punched up a little bit. I'd like to think I'm pretty tapped into this, and I'm a self-described Star Wars fan, but I did not even know this game was coming out until a few months ago, and I really didn't know that it's been out on Switch and mobile since May of 2024. Zynga might want to consider some sponsored streams or content or gameplay or something, because if they're not careful, this game's going to be dead on arrival. So that's two franchise hero shooters that already exist, but I want to bring up another franchise that can make the shift into this genre pretty easily, and that's obviously DC. We've seen some pretty popular DC titles in the multiplayer and fighting spaces with DC Universe Online, and Injustice. I think a DC hero shooter could find a middle ground between those two games in story, gameplay, and design that would bring a lot of players to their game. The DC version would have a built-in motivator to play. People are going to want to compare it to Marvel rivals. Since both of these franchises have been active at the same time, they've been pitted against each other to see which is the better superhero storyteller. With the range of characters that DC has, they could slide into this genre and at least make some noise as they go up against rivals. Don't get me wrong, it would feel almost identical. Honestly, a DC game in this space would feel closer to Marvel rivals than Marvel rivals feels to Overwatch, and that's a pretty small margin as it is. I think that makes sense. The game would need to offer something that sets it apart from rivals and Overwatch in a big way. Maybe something like a story mode, something we know is wanted in this genre and something that OW2 failed to deliver on, which led to fans going wild. Or something like a tighter battle royale, which feeds into the fantastical elements of playing as a superhero but doesn't feel too childish. James Gunn, the current head of the DCU, has already said he's kind of open to something like this, which is pretty much like saying he'd be open to hitting a grand slam off a tee and then making a bunch of money in the process, but really, a decent dev team that isn't Warner Brothers could definitely make something like this happen. But at the end of the day, at this moment, nothing has been announced and we'll just have to see what happens. As far as this new subgenre of franchise hero shooters goes, it's hard to ignore the impact that it's had on modern games that have defined the genre. Like I said, Overwatch 2 saw a 40% drop in players when Rivals came out, and I can only expect that these player bases will continue to diverge as more and more titles like this release, which might end up being a really big problem. We as players can only take so much, and too many of these franchise-based hero shooters is just going to cause fatigue amongst players. When that's set in motion, we're going to see a power struggle, and one game is going to come out on top. I don't think other games will be, completely canceled, but they will have a significant lack of players compared to that leading title. The first option seems to be one that's happening anywhere, where this trend of franchise-based hero shooters becomes its own strong subgenre within video games. If Marvel Rivals keeps up the pace and the Star Wars Hunters ends up making some noise, who knows what kinds of IP we'll see enter the space. I mentioned DC, but even series like Atla or Harry Potter, or even wildcards like Percy Jackson, probably have enough juice to get a game off the ground. Would those games reach the success of Overwatch or even Rivals? I doubt it, but they'd get made, so there's that. If I was a betting man, which I'm not, don't gamble, I think this second scenario is far more likely. I think the momentum of the MCU and other Marvel games and Overwatch 2's lack of fan buy-in set the shooter up for the perfect amount of success at just the right time. I really don't think any other franchise will have this set of circumstances again. If by some miracle a dev or decision maker found this video interesting enough to watch to this point, please listen to me. Don't dive into hero shooters. Take that IP that you've got and develop something that's worth playing, not to be compared, but to be celebrated. At the end of the day, I'm just some random person on the internet, and you probably are too, so I want to know what you think. Are we going to see more of these games? Do you want to see more? If there are more, are they going to merit any attention? Let me know down below, and let's have a fun conversation. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. I'm the little ajoll in your screen, and I will see you in the next video.